today to discuss the players' protein requirements. I'd like to quickly give a brief explanation of protein's role in the body and how it works in building muscle mass, which is what we're obviously looking to achieve with our players. So basically, proteins are made up of amino acids that are used to build and repair muscles. These proteins are constantly being broken down and replaced, which is called protein turnover. And during training, the rate of this increases, which is what enhances muscle strength and increases lean body mass. High protein consumption is necessary in players' diets compared to regular people that don't train at this intense level, as it increases protein turnover and essentially increases muscle recovery and mass. However, excess protein intake can have negative effects on diet and muscle recovery. So your coach's recommendations were for the players to consume 5 grams per kilogram of protein a day. I can see why you would have suggested this, as many people believe that higher protein intakes are necessary for athletes to increase muscle mass and strength, which it is to an extent. But we know that the players aren't seeing results, even though they are following these guidelines. So what's going wrong? Firstly, overconsumption of protein, which for these players would be around 1.5 grams per kilogram of protein a day, is pretty much useless, as it will not be used for muscle synthesis. Instead, it is oxidized or converted to carbohydrates or fat, so more or less pointless in recovery. I also found that the majority of these players are consuming their protein specifically in the evenings and in place of other macronutrients. This is an issue as protein needs to be spread throughout the day, with a specific focus on consuming protein in the hour after training to aid recovery, and it is key in building that muscle mass. Since the players are mostly consuming all their protein at once, only a small percentage of that protein is actually being used to repair muscles, and the rest is either being oxidized or converted to carbohydrates and fats. This may be a factor in why we're not seeing any results in muscle gain in the players. Let me give you an example. If we're consuming high protein meals, say over 200 grams of protein, compared to a meal containing 30 grams of protein, which is still a high protein meal, it shows no difference in protein synthesis and therefore no muscle gain extra. Adding to that, the timing of when players are consuming protein, only in the evening, is inadequate in helping gain muscle mass. These players are at a level where they're constantly repairing and constantly recovering, meaning protein needs to be constant and available. And in order to increase protein synthesis throughout the day, protein should be consumed by the athletes over the day in 3 to 4 hour intervals, with a focus on protein consumption within the hour after training and games, as this hour after training is where the body is using protein the most to build muscles. Now, even if they still consume 5 grams of protein per kilogram per day, but at the right time and during intervals throughout the day, I would still say this would be too high. The main reason for this is the players are consuming protein instead of other macronutrients. So, lacking in these nutrients, such as carbohydrate, can have a massive effect on players' performance, which I believe we've been seeing. And some of the players on the team seem to be consuming protein in such excessive amounts, which results in them missing out on these other important macronutrients. This can consequently lead to their performance being poorly affected, as they may not get enough carbohydrates to fuel their performance, and their endurance may drop. This is why they might not be training to their fullest potential, and why the team is not gaining muscle as we all wish. Although there is more research needed into this, there is also studies that show high protein consumption having poor effects on long-term health, and also might cause gastrointestinal problems like diarrhea or constipation, which I can imagine you all know would lead to very uncomfortable training or match days, and they definitely would not be performing to their best of their abilities. So after reading over all these studies, I've made some protein recommendations that will allow the players to perform to the best of their ability and increase their muscle mass and strength. So, the protein requirements for the female football players should be decreased to 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram per day. However, this is just based on the assumption that they are all athlete diets, including protein that are easily absorbed, such as meats and dairies. For vegan and vegetarian players, plant-based sources of protein I would recommend eating are soy, tempeh, pea protein, and peanuts. Any players that are on vegan or vegetarian diets should be consuming more protein depending on the type of plant protein they are consuming, as some plant proteins just cannot be absorbed as easily as meat proteins. This is also still just a general guideline, and I really believe that the protein requirements should be individualized for each player. Based on these recommendations, the players should be consuming 0.24 to 0.3 grams per kilogram of protein every 3 to 4 hours while awake. Assuming that the players are awake for 16 hours of the day, this would mean approximately 5 times a day. So to put it into perspective for you, let's say that the average player is around 70 kilograms. They would need to consume 20 to 25 grams of protein every 3 to 4 hours. For example, this would be around 80 grams of chicken breast, 4 large eggs, or a cup of lentils, which I believe is very achievable for the players, especially if they're just getting variety in their proteins. We also as well really want to focus on protein consumption in the hour directly after training. I think this is one of the most vital things we've been missing out on. My recommendation is to consume 25 grams of protein within the half hour after completing training. This will put a lot of pressure on the athletes to consume that protein immediately after training and will give a half an hour leeway for the protein to be consumed within the hour. As we know, a lot of athletes will forget. Consuming this protein immediately after training or game gives the body amino acids it needs to repair the muscles and build that muscle mass. So try to encourage players to get into the habit of consuming like a protein shake with 1 scoop of protein powder directly after training. To summarize, each player's protein recommendations should ideally be individualized to meet their specific needs in order to gain muscle mass and strength. They should really be focusing getting that protein shake or some other form of protein in the half an hour after training and games. Day-to-day players should be consuming their protein evenly throughout the day, consuming protein every 3 to 4 hours. Although I understand where the protein recommendations were coming from, coach, if we decrease these requirements to 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram per day for each player, we will start to see the player's performance increase and we will get that gain in muscle mass and strength, which we've been looking for. So thank you so much for listening.